In this rapid fire guide, you will learn all the basics of how to create stunning movie soundtracks, cinematic video game music, or epic orchestral tracks on YouTube from zero. I made this to be your free entry point into the amazing world of orchestral composing. I'm your teacher today, Kevin Kuschel. I am on a mission to enable everyone with a passion for music to make soundtracks similar to those in their favorite movies or video games. My goal is to send you on your composer journey. For this, I founded Become a Pro Composer, the community where composers from all over the world can learn and grow their skills together. After you finish the video, come join us on Discord. It's free, the link is below. There's over 1,000 people there. We have regular composer games, community workshops, events, giveaways, all the good stuff. Become a Pro Composer is what I would have liked when I started my own journey. Let's go over all the steps that will enable you to get music from your brain, through your fingers, into your computer, and make it sound awesome. It's not a whole lot that you need to produce orchestral music from home. Probably much less than you would think if you look at some home studios. This would be enough. Technology has made it incredibly accessible to get started with soundtrack production right from your bedroom.
You just need to break through the myth that you can't create a great Hollywood blockbuster on an iPad.
Here's the bare minimum home studio things that I would recommend to get started. You need a powerful computer or a laptop that's powerful enough to host your music software. It doesn't have to be an absolute monster. The things you need to look out for are CPU, RAM, and storage. Don't bother too much about the graphics card or shiny RGB. But seriously, get the best CPU for your budget and as much RAM as your budget allows. As a general rule of thumb, don't go below 16 gigabytes. 32 gigabytes would be better. 64 gigabytes and you're pretty much covered for even your larger orchestral tracks. Anything above 64 gigabytes is pretty much professional use. You can always expand your RAM, so no need to go wild right from the start. If you can, try to get at least 32 gigabytes. You're going to need a lot of storage. Your project folders will get larger and larger. You will have libraries of virtual instruments that take a lot of space. Important, you want fast SSD, not old HDD storage. Else your virtual instruments will load slowly and painfully. It's not fun. Personally, I use a lot of these external SSDs by Samsung. You can also get internal SSDs, NVMEs. All of these are fine. Maybe start with 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes for your first start and then expand as needed. You also want to get one of these little boxes called audio interfaces. They look like this, or this, or this. An audio interface basically connects your computer to your music hardware. Whether you're playing an electric guitar or record a microphone, they will go into your audio interface. You don't have to go with a crazy expensive one. About $100, 150 maybe should do. Make sure it has 48 volt phantom power to supply more demanding microphones. Personally, I use the Focusrite Scarlett with 2 inputs and 2 outputs. That's enough for me. If you really have to, you can skip buying the audio interface for your very first steps and get it later. Now you gotta listen to your music. So either headphones or speakers. Though headphones are probably easier for beginners. There's no right or wrong here. Speakers can give you a bit more of a dimensional experience with the room, but they also need more setup to have your room properly acoustically treated. Headphones sound more direct. Personally, I would say in the beginning, get a decent pair of headphones to see if all this composing stuff is for you. Something like the Biodynamic DT770 or DT990 should work. Sennheisers or Audio Technicas are also good. None of these will hold you back from writing amazing orchestral soundtracks. Some professional composers work with headphones all the time. One more thing for our little home studio. You'll probably want to get a MIDI keyboard. It's not 100% necessary, but it helps with recording your music in. You don't need to be a pianist to use a MIDI keyboard. Trust me, it'll be super helpful to record your melodies, tweak settings with knobs and faders, and it's just very convenient. No need to go crazy expensive here at the beginning. You can go with a more affordable one like the Nectar Impact series or M-Audio Oxygen and pick any version with a number of keys that you think makes sense for you. If you want to play fully fledged piano pieces, you want 88 keys. 49 is a good compromise and should be enough for most applications and composing needs. Below 49 keys, we're going more into a travel-friendly territory, so consider that if you're moving a lot. All extra purchases, like fancy breath controller, modular fader thingies, stream decks, macro buttons, can wait until later. Seriously, they can wait. Next, you want to write soundtracks. Guess what most soundtracks in the past, present, and probably the future mostly consist of? Yes, the orchestra. You'll need to learn a little bit about the orchestra. I will teach you the very basics so you get a good idea of what the orchestra is composed of, without going too crazy into detail. The orchestra has 4 main sections: strings, brass, woodwinds, and percussion. For strings, All instruments kind of look like this, brownish, and you bow them. Some are smaller, some are really big. From high pitch to low pitch, we have the violins and the violas. The violas are a little bit larger and a little bit lower than the cellos, again larger and a little bit lower. And finally the big double basses, very large and very low. In general, the larger the instruments, the lower the sound. For brass, we have the trumpets, the French horns, the trombones, and the tuba. There are also variations like the bass trombones, the Wagner tuba, euphonium, and cimbasso, but we focus for now on the trumpets, horns, trombones, and tubas. And for the woodwinds, we have the flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons. Woodwinds have many types, like the piccolo flute, which goes even higher than the flute, and the contrabassoon, which goes even lower than the bassoon. But in general, flute, oboe, clarinet, and bassoon. Nice. The high instruments often play the melodies. So that would be the violins, the flutes, the trumpets. You could have the melody, for example, played by the violins first, and then double it with the flutes to make the sound a bit thicker. French horns are cinematic powerhouses for proud melodies. The oboe and the clarinet woodwinds often play more supportive textures and harmonies that are underneath the melody and make it sound richer. Cellos sound generally lovely. They can really sing. They are super versatile. They can go pretty high, but also deep and rumbling. They are ultra flexible and able to play melodies, harmonies, and double bass lines. Cellos are great. The percussion section includes lots of drums. Anything you can hit. There's tuned percussion and untuned percussion. Tuned percussion makes a pitch like a timpani. You can actually play melodies with tuned percussion. Think xylophone, marimba. Untuned percussion are just kind of drums. Big drums sound lower, like the grand casa, the bass drum. It's perfect for adding weight and accent. You've got snares for a sharper accent, a sort of military feeling. You've got taiko ensembles and toms for epicness in cinematic soundtracks. Small percussion, like sticks, shakers, and high-pitched metals are great for high-end sparkle. Now, 2 super useful hacks to understand how to write for orchestral instruments. These are very general, very basic, so take them as guidelines and not as rules. Composing is an art form that's been around for centuries. It's complex and it can fill a lifetime of studying. So these, of course, are extremely simplified concepts. First, the lower the instrument, the fewer notes it should play. And the higher the instruments, the more notes it should play. This is a simplification, but what I mean is low instruments like basses take much more space in the frequency spectrum. Our brains are much worse at hearing all the details from a low instrument compared to a high one. Listen to a fast melody played by a double bass and then by a violin. Which one could you understand better? I hope the violin. So usually your bass lines should be simple. Short notes or long notes doesn't matter, but nothing too frantic unless you want chaos. Melodies, on the other hand, can be expressive with grunts and crazy flourishes, trills. Then you can sort of map out these instruments from low to high on a scale like this. Second, lower instruments should have larger intervals of notes playing together, and higher instruments should have smaller intervals. Intervals are distances between notes. For example, this is a large interval, and this is a small interval. Low instruments take up much more space in your inner ear and how your brain processes notes. Similarly to how they should not play super fast and frantic notes because you can't separate them well from each other, they also shouldn't play notes at the same time that are very close to each other because you can't separate them. Compare 2 tuba notes and 2 flute notes. The flute notes are much easier to understand and separate. So in your low section of the orchestra, double basses, tubas, bassoons, and maybe cellos, let them play with space. Let them breathe. Don't cramp your arrangement. Use larger intervals like octaves or fifths when doubling. If you don't know what octaves or fifths are, basically that's an octave. Pretty large interval, that's a fifth, also fairly large and stable sounding. This would be a smaller one, like a third. The same thing goes for the drums. Lower drums should play fewer notes, adding weight to a new beat occasionally or part of a track. Higher drums, like shakers or medals, like think of a hi-hat in a drum. They can play fast rhythms and steady drives. The mid drums are somewhere in between for like more rhythmic definition. Do you have any questions so far? Drop them in the comments below. I'm happy to help out and will answer them. Quick recap: 4 main instruments per section of the orchestra: strings, violins, violas, cellos, basses, brass, trumpets, horns, trombones, tubas, and woodwinds, flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons. The lower the instruments, the fewer notes they should play, and also the lower instruments, the larger the intervals should be of notes playing together. The higher the instruments, the more notes they can play, and the closer the intervals or harmonies can be. It's all for the sake of clarity. We have many instruments in the orchestra playing together, so we need to make sure that it doesn't become a mess, or as us composers like to say, it becomes muddy. Now, before we jump right into recreating our favorite Hans Zimmer or John Williams soundtrack, we need to understand how music works. There's a thing called music theory. Many people dread music theory. They think it's ultra complex, outdated, or difficult. It's important that you get the basics. For our purposes, we don't need to analyze Stravinsky. I will give you a first appetizer into how music works and how you can control it to put you on your journey. So, sound comes in pitches. Pitch is basically a sound wave with a frequency. Different pitches have different frequency, and that's measured in hertz, vibrations per second. Now, a sound with a constant frequency can, I guess, play for a second or 2 seconds or like different time. And then it becomes a note. A note is pitch plus duration. Now, on the keyboard, you will see a pattern of keys that repeat after every 8th white key. And on total, you have like this chunk of 12 keys that's called an octave. So we have like the notes, the C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then it continues from the C. The black key above a white key is called sharp, like C sharp or D sharp. But if the black key is below a white key, then you call it a flat. For example, a D flat. So I'm sure you'll figure out that a C sharp and a D flat is the same thing. It's just in a different context. Don't get too confused by it. Now it's a music theory thing, and we will not go into this in detail in this video. There's a total of 12 notes inside an octave. Those 12 notes pretty much make up most of the Western orchestral music that's ever been written. So what you can do is you can play a scale. A scale is just a sequence, a specific pattern of notes playing strictly upwards or downwards. The most relevant scales that you'll be using all the time, I promise you, are major scales and minor scales. Just memorize for now major scales and minor scales, and they have patterns. The building blocks for our patterns are steps. Half steps and whole steps. A half step is basically 2 keys on the keyboard directly next to each other. So from a white key to a black key, for example. A whole step is 2 half steps, or for example, 2 white keys next to each other if there's a black key between them. Now, the pattern for a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. I always pronounce it like a beat. It helps me to memorize it. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So we start from C, we play a whole step, a whole step, a half step, a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, a half step. It sounds nice, bright, and friendly, right? Yes, that's major. You can play this pattern starting from any key. You'll get a major scale. Starting from D, that's how it sounds. They all sound happy, shiny, and clean. The minor scale pattern is whole, half, whole, half, whole. Minor scales sound dark and mellow. Kinda sad, but also nicely cinematic, I guess. You can use this pattern, whole, half, half, whole, starting on any key, and you get the minor scale. With these two scales, major and minor, you can play a lot of music. Now, you can also play notes at the same time, of course, not just in sequence in a scale. Notes playing at the same time are called chords. The most important one is the triad. A triad consists of 3 notes, and it's the first, the third, and the 5th note of a scale, of a note in a scale. So, let's see. We pick the C of our C major scale. First note, third note, and 5th note. So it's C, E, and G. Play them together. C major. C major because it's the C chord in the C major scale. Same for the minor. First note, third note, and 5th note. The D minor chord is D, F, and A. Now, how do we write a song with this? We need different chords, not just one, not just C major. So how do we know what chords we can build and which ones we can use? One thing we can do is we can build the triad of each note of the scale that we're in. So let's start with C, that's C, E, G, first note, third note, 5th note, then to the D, first note, third note, 5th note, D, F, A, D minor, then E, G, B, F, A, C, G, B, D, A, C, E, and B, D, F. These are the chords of the C major scale. We don't want to use any black keys here because these are not notes of the C major scale. So if our song is in the scale of C major, we also call it the key of C major. If C major is our home, where we like to start from and go back to, where the listener is familiar with, then we can use these chords from the C major scale, and it will sound pleasant or consonant. We can chain some of these chords together to get a chord progression. Let's pick 4 of these C major chords into a progression. Let's pick C major, G major, A minor, and F major. This is a very popular chord progression used in many pop songs. It's just chords from those that we just stacked by playing the first, third, and 5th note of every note from the scale. Now we can play random notes of the scale with one hand as the melody and put them over this chord progression that always repeats. Repeat the chord progression and we have a simple, nice piece of music. Wow, congratulations, we just completed pop music. Just kidding, there's more to it, but this is so simple and nice, honestly. You can try different chords of this C major scale. Some will work better than others, and why some don't work as well goes beyond the scope of this video, but experiment around and you'll find interesting stuff. The same thing with C minor. First, third, and 5th note of the scale. And then we have these chords. We can put a chord progression and play some music over it while using the notes from the scale. Nice. When we have a chord progression, it can get pretty boring after a while, right? If you always cycle. So what we can do is we can pick other chords from the scale. Or we can change the scale or the key of the track completely. That's called modulation. For example, if we move from C major to D major. Suddenly everything sounds energized and fresh. Pop music does this a lot. I also do this a lot, and there are different ways to modulate. John Williams, for example, likes to do this crazy chromatic median stuff. Check out the Orchestral Music Production for Beginners course if you're interested in learning more details here. Now, music is always in the context of time. Usually we have a beat like a metronome that we can follow across a track. And you probably know that we usually like counting from 1 to 4 in music. You know, you always hear this like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. This rhythm helps us as composers place music in a nice little timing grid most of the time. Of course, we can change tempo and go freeform, but let's go with a simple example here. For that, we use bars. Not a energy bar and not the alcohol thing, but a musical unit. A bar is a unit of musical time. One bar consists of a full note length. You can cut it down in half and then you have a half note. And guess what? 2 half notes make a full note, make up a bar. At least in this 1, 2, 3, 4 example. It's like eating pizza. If you cut your pizza into 8 slices, how many 8th slices make up one whole pizza? Of course, 8. How many 16th slices make up a whole pizza? 16. How many 16th slices make up half a pizza? 8. That's how notes go. It's just simple ratios. Usually most music is written using full notes, half notes, quarter notes, 8th notes, and 16th notes. Faster ones like 32s are quite rare because they're very hard to play. Maybe stuff like Flight of the Bumblebee. Now we can count like 1, 2, 3, 4. Each number of these is a quarter note because there are 4 quarters in a whole. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's one bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, second bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, third bar, and so on. This is called a 4-quarter time signature. 4 quarter notes, 4-quarter time signature. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's also 3-quarter time, which has 3 quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like a waltz. You can also have 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are called time signatures. The tempo just basically says how fast your notes are. For example, in 4-quarter time, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we make the tempo faster, you still count the same. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just faster. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I was increasing the tempo and not the way that I count. With tempo, 60 beats per minute means, for example, that 1 quarter note plays every second. A 120 beats per minute means that 2 quarter notes play every second. Congratulations! That's all you need to know for now about music theory to get started writing orchestral soundtracks. I understand that hearing all of this for the first time can be tough. There is a lot to memorize and to revise. But if you get these core concepts down, you can literally write Hans Zimmer stuff. You can write Thomas Bergersen stuff. You are seriously powerfully equipped. Anything beyond that in music theory is nice, it is interesting and powerful, but it's not strictly necessary to get started and have fun, experiment and improve. Software. Okay, now you know all kinds of stuff about music, but how do you even make music with a computer? Even if you have a MIDI keyboard, it won't make a sound by itself. It doesn't have a speaker. So you need a canvas to paint your music on and play it back. That's a digital audio workstation, or a DAW. It's a horrible word anyway. A DAW is basically your canvas that you paint your music on. It's where your projects are, it's where you work, it's your workspace. There are many DAWs for orchestral music. Consider Cubase, Studio One, Logic Pro if you're on Mac, or Reaper if you're on a tight budget. Then there's also stuff like Ableton Live and FL Studio. I wouldn't recommend these directly for orchestral music because they're more geared to other genres with their workflows like hip-hop or electronic dance music, but if you have them, then it will also be fine if you use them. You can make just as fine orchestral music with Ableton or FL Studio as you can with Cubase, Reaper or Studio One. For each of these DAWs, I know at least one professional full-time composer who makes fantastic soundtracks using them. Don't overthink your decision. You can get free demo versions for each of these DAWs. Try them out. Pick the one that you like the workflow most and just get it and use it. They all sound the same. It's just an empty canvas. You'll be fine. Now, we learned about violins and tubas, but how do we play a violin if we don't have one? I don't have a violin. Do you have one in your basement? We use sample libraries. Sample libraries are bundles of software that we can buy. Some come also for free. Imagine a person with a violin sitting in an orchestral hall, and also there's a dude or a girl with a microphone saying, okay, can you play this note? Or can you play that note? Can you play it a bit louder? Can you play anything really? Can you play it short and long? And so you get the point. They make the instrumentalists play everything until their fingers bleed, and they record every note at every volume into tiny audio files until they have thousands of them. Then they program these files and add nice features and functionality until they have a sample library. The sample library then lets you play the recordings of this real violinist on your computer. For example, with your MIDI keyboard. It uses the real sound recordings that they recorded from the violinist. You don't have to use only one violinist. You can also sit a full orchestra into the hall or a 16 violin section. You can sample anything, literally anything. You can sample your burps and farts, map them onto your keyboard and have a playable instrument. Just not sure if anyone wants to pay money for that. Now, in order for the sample library to work, you need a sampler. A sampler picks the right audio file out of these thousands based on what key you press on your keyboard or how hard you press the note. When you add a note to a DAW, either using the mouse and keyboard or your MIDI keyboard, it's called a MIDI note. MIDI is like the file format that sends information of how hard the note should be played, how loud, how long, which note it is, like which pitch. All this information gets set together to the sampler, which then picks the right audio file from the sample library. And then you get the right note played back to you. There are free samplers. For example, Spitfire Audio is a sample library developer that comes with their own Spitfire player. Orchestral Tools comes with their Sine player. But the industry standard is still Native Instruments Contact. I would recommend you buy Contact, the full version. There's also a free version that can play many sample libraries by bigger developers because they pay like a big license fee, so their samplers can be used in the free version of Contact. But there is a whole world of freebies and hidden gems, smaller niche sample libraries that require the full version of Contact. If you buy Contact on sale, it will be worth it. The full version of Contact also comes with a Contact Factory library, which is a huge collection of all sorts of instruments, orchestral instruments, band, choir, world instruments, pianos. The quality is decent, maybe not the best, but there are hidden gems that will help you if you need a specific instrument and you don't have it in any other sample library. Another important thing, there are a few freebies available for the free Contact player. Like I think Heaviosity's Emotive Choir should still work. You can get it activated in native access and then you're eligible for a discounted cross-grade to Contact Full, even if you're coming from a freebie. That's a nice way to save some money. Composers love sample libraries, but which one should you buy? Which ones are good? Which ones are bad? If you know my YouTube channel, you'll see that I work a lot with sample libraries, testing them, reviewing them, comparing them. It's big fun to me, but this can be also a rabbit hole. Many composers spend more time discussing sample libraries than composing music. Be careful not to do the same. I want you to write music and get better. Buy the sample libraries that make you write better music, that make it easier for you to write good music. And then write music. For the beginning, I recommend getting an all-in-one orchestral sample library. An all-in-one orchestral sample library has pretty much all the orchestral instruments. You can write full orchestral soundtracks with them. They sound great. Check out this track, for example. It was made completely with an all-in-one orchestral sample library. If you can write music like that, you can then look into more focused sample libraries with more details to get more out of them, more control. Dedicated strings libraries, cinematic libraries, extra percussion libraries, and all that stuff. But please, I think it's better to start with an all-in-one orchestral library, learn how to use it, apply your music theory knowledge that you've learned, and write music before spending thousands on other libraries. I made a video on my best and worst pick for all-in-one orchestral sample libraries in a cool tier list. Check it out here. Now we have everything in place. We have a computer with a digital audio workstation, sample libraries, and we know the basics of the orchestra and music theory. Let's write down some notes and actually get composing. A DAW, no matter which one you pick, is pretty much the same. Create an instrument track, load your sampler, in my case that's Contact, and load an orchestral instrument. I'll use Nucleus. If you have nothing yet, if you have no sample library, you can always pick the free BBC Symphony Orchestra Discover. It's kind of limited, but you can write full orchestral music with it. I'm loading the main instruments here. The violins, violas, cellos, basses, the flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, the trumpets, trombones, and tubas. Trivia question, which one did I leave out? It's the French horns. I load all of them, plus the percussion, of course, so I can then be ready to write music. You can save this as a template and load it every time you want to create a new project, so you don't have to do all of this from scratch again. If you want, I'll make a separate video on how to organize a template even more nicely. Just let me know if you need it. Now, for composing, there are no hard rules. You know how different music can be, and anything is possible. But there are guidelines. You can bend and break these guidelines. Go crazy. But for now, we want to keep it simple. When composing, try to think of the following 5 main elements. Melody is the catchy part that we sing or hum along to. Harmony supports the melody musically and adds context in between. It helps us understand if a song is happy or sad, maybe bittersweet. The bass is the foundation at the bottom, often playing the first note of the chord of a chord progression. So in a C major, that will be a C. It's also called the root note. Rhythm is how we arrange these notes over time. Do we want to make them feel jumpy and frantic or smooth and soft? And finally, decoration elements. Embellishments that add extra detail like string runs, flute figures, harp glissandi, that sort of stuff. They add detail and life to composition. Melodies should be memorable, they should evolve, and usually come back somehow. Think about storytelling. Hans Zimmer says he's primarily a storyteller. And this is important. We want to tell a story with our music. We introduce our main motif, the main theme or topic of our story. Repeat it to make it more important and dear to the listener, and then have it venture into the wide world, go to a different place, and ultimately come back to the beginning with a little twist because our hero has developed on the journey. Let's write a melody. Introduce the main motif. Repeat it. Put it in a different place. And let it come back in a different form. Nice melody. Now, let's assign bass notes. And add a chord progression to fill the spectrum with notes from the scale and chords that we picked to add more texture. Let's pick A minor. We can double the melody below and add a counter melody that plays when the melody rests to create a back and forth interaction, making it more interesting to listen to. Now we have a full piano sketch. Let's assign it to orchestral instruments. Please note that I won't go into all the steps and all the instruments here. Instead, what I want you to understand is the general concept of assigning melody lines and voices from a piano sketch to the orchestral instruments and observe how together they create that full orchestral sound. My full flagship course, Orchestral Music Production for Beginners, is for you if you want to learn all of this in a more guided and structured way and create your very own production-ready soundtrack from scratch. Here's the quick version as a first introduction. Remember the 2 rules for a balanced orchestral sound. Low instruments play fewer notes, high instruments play more notes. Lower instruments have larger intervals, higher instruments have smaller intervals. We can assign the melody, for example, to the violins and the bass line to the double basses. The bassoons from the woodwind section are pretty much the basis of the woodwinds. So similarly to the tuba for the brass, we can either assign the bass line to all 3 for a thicker sound or start with the basses and switch to the bassoons later. This is how we can orchestrate and play with musical colors by using different instruments that have similar ranges. We can also switch the melody from the violins to the flutes, for example. The melody doesn't have to be at the very top. We can play the melody with the French horns and have flutes or violins play decoration above it, hovering on the ceiling, so to say, when the melody is floating underneath in the room. These are all creative decisions that you can make. There's no right or wrong here. You can even have the melody in the bass. Just be careful that it doesn't play too many notes that blur into each other. For the low range, we want to double the bass notes in octaves with the cellos. And here's a little cool thing. The trombones have a piercing timbre, like a characteristic, unique sound to them. And even when playing low, they can separate 2 notes pretty well because they sound so sharp. The cellos have a much harder time with this. When we look at all our MIDI notes as a whole, we want to make sure that there's not too much overlap. The notes should be evenly distributed vertically from the bass all the way to the top. Obvious gaps may indicate missing elements for a rich and balanced orchestral sound. Of course, it's fine if we want to have some parts of our track play lightly and only by the top elements. And others may be dark and menacing in the lower registers. But make sure to do these decisions consciously. With the same principles, low instruments, fewer notes, higher instruments, more notes, we're adding some low percussion that adds a few accents every now and then. And the rest is really just melody, harmony, chords, and a bass line. The melody played by the violins, flutes, and horns, the harmony by the second violins, violas, and other woodwinds, the chords by the trombones in this case, and the basses by the double basses. Here's what it sounds like after just stupidly copy-pasting the MIDI to the orchestral instruments, keeping in mind the principles about instrument range, note spacing, and filling gaps in the frequency spectrum. Yes, this is not very refined. There is no clever key switching for the articulations. The MIDI editing is rough, and there are better sample libraries with a more realistic sound. But this is how it all works. This is how we got a full orchestral sound from a simple piano sketch with just a few elements. And from here, we can then keep refining, keep optimizing, and make it awesome. There are two more important words in the world of orchestral music production that we need to talk about: mixing and mastering. Mixing and mastering are basically two professions, two things you can do to make the sound quality of your music better. With mixing, you balance the different volumes of your instruments. You make little changes in the frequency spectrum. For example, maybe your cellos sound too rumbly in the low notes. You can use an equalizer to cut out some low frequencies from the cellos to give space, making the horns in that case more audible without changing the actual notes. You can compress the sound, so everything sounds more like one unit, where the differences in volume of the notes and the dynamics are not as big, and everything sounds a little bit more glued together. You can control where the instruments are in the stereo spectrum between the left and right side. All these things that are about the technical parts of sound quality and not how your notes are played by the instruments are part of mixing. One helpful thing that you can do for your orchestral instruments, because there are so many of them and they all carry a bit of room ambience, is use an equalizer to cut out the lower frequencies. Remember, low frequencies take more space in our inner ear, so they can easily build up and sound unpleasant and muddy. Also lower mid frequencies, like 300 to 500 Hertz. Usually you can remove low frequencies from your instruments until the instruments start sounding different. That's when you have to stop. The violin should still sound like a violin, but you don't need the hidden rumble at the bottom, because it really adds up if you have 20, 30, 40 instruments with this almost inaudible rumble at the low end. Apply a light compressor to ensure a bit of control, put a threshold and then a lower ratio so it works just a bit. You don't want that pumping effect that you get when you do it too much. Make sure none of the instruments stick out in volume like a sore thumb. Often, especially if you use an all-in-one orchestra, they're already balanced quite nicely from the beginning. Now please keep in mind, mixing can increase the clarity of the track by maybe 20%, but a bad arrangement cannot be magically turned into a good one. Keep composing and refining your music, and you'll see improvement over time. That in mind, mastering is the final adjustment you do to the final master channel of the entire track, without looking into the individual instruments or making changes to one instrument. In mastering, you ensure that your track sounds polished and shiny. It sounds loud and clear. There are some tools that you can use. Mastering compressors, limiters to make sure that there is no clipping. When your signal is too loud, it can distort, which can happen if you layer more instruments or don't pay attention to it. A limiter prevents that, ensuring that your music doesn't go above the threshold. Again, there is much, much more to mixing and mastering, and they are entire careers of their own. But for now, just try to keep in mind these basic concepts. Mixing is all about balancing the different instruments against each other and the instrument groups against each other. You try to carve out certain frequencies to give space to other instruments with an EQ, ensuring that there is no build-up in low frequencies. You apply compression to glue everything together and also take care of the stereo spectrum. Mastering is about making our track loud enough, polished, and ready for release. Now, export your track, and we have made our first very small orchestral piece. I know it was fast and rapid fire, but if you watch this video from beginning to end, you will now know pretty much every step how composers create their soundtracks using virtual instruments in a DAW, whenever they're not using real live orchestras, of course. So if you're at zero, set up a basic studio with a laptop, a solid pair of headphones, a MIDI controller, and an audio interface. Test some DAWs and sample libraries. Check the freebies first and the demo versions. Join the Become Pro Composer Discord community to ask for help. You're not alone in this. We can do this together. Go through the chapters of this video, learn the music theory, and try to compose your own little piece. Start with a motif that you expand into a melody, put some chords underneath, and assign them to the orchestral instruments. Try to ensure that everything is well balanced and play around with an equalizer if things get too muddy. Don't be afraid to post your first creation on the Become a Pro Composer Discord. Enroll in orchestral music production for beginners if you want to learn in more detail and create a full cinematic soundtrack together. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.